The courtroom was silent, not the respectful silence of a legal proceeding. This was heavier, thicker, almost suffocating. Every seat was filled. Reporters held their breath, cameras aimed like loaded guns, waiting for something, anything, to happen. At the center of it all stood a teenage boy, barely 17, wrists chained, expression unreadable. And then he smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or one of confusion. No, this was something darker. A slow, deliberate smirk that crept across his face as the judge looked up from the case file. You could hear the collective gasp ripple through the room. One juror shifted uncomfortably. Another closed her eyes. But Judge Judy didn't flinch. Her gaze locked on his like two flintstones about to spark fire. Friends, you've probably seen her before. Sharp, decisive, unshaken by arrogance. But this moment was different. This wasn't a televised dispute about broken contracts or petty lies. This was a real criminal hearing, a murder case involving a boy who laughed in the face of the justice system. As the clerk read his name, Ethan Miller, even that sounded wrong. It was the kind of name that should have belonged to a kid playing football, not one accused of taking a life. Judge Judy folded her hands slowly, deliberately, studying him as if searching for something behind that grin. The victim's family sat in the front row, a mother gripping a framed photograph of her son so tightly her knuckles turned white. The father's jaw trembled, fighting a war between rage and grief. But Ethan didn't look at them. His eyes wandered across the courtroom, stopping on the cameras, the audience, even the bailiff. He seemed to enjoy the spectacle. "Mr. Miller," Judge Judy began, her voice calm but cutting through the silence like a blade, "do you understand the gravity of why you're here today?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, that smirk widening, a mockery of remorse. "Yeah, guess I do." A murmur rolled through the room. Someone whispered, "Monster." But the judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her stare did all the talking. For a brief second, it felt like time froze. The courtroom, the press, the spectators, everyone caught in a moment they would remember for the rest of their lives. How could a boy so young, so calm, appear proud of what he'd done? The narrator's voice rises with quiet intensity. What kind of world shapes a child like this? What kind of pain hides behind a grin like that? Because in just a few minutes, that smirk, that symbol of defiance, would be gone, replaced by tears no one expected. Because Judge Judy wasn't just about to deliver justice, she was about to deliver a sentence that would pierce deeper than any prison walls. And when she spoke those words, Ethan Miller, the boy who smirked at the world, finally broke. Before the smirk, before the cameras, before the courtroom fell silent, there was just a boy, a quiet kid from a broken home who never seemed to fit anywhere. Ethan Miller grew up in a neighborhood where sirens sang him to sleep and fights echoed through the thin walls of apartment hallways. His mother worked double shifts at a diner. His father disappeared before he learned to read. At school, teachers said he was unreachable. Not stupid, just closed off, like someone who had already decided the world wasn't worth trusting. He got into trouble early, not because he enjoyed hurting others, but because he didn't know what to do with his anger. Detentions became suspensions. Suspensions turned into probation. He'd stare blankly at authority figures, offering no reaction, no remorse. They'd say, "He doesn't care." But deep down, maybe Ethan cared too much. Maybe that was the problem. By 15, he had joined a group of older teens who treated chaos like currency. They laughed at danger, lived off adrenaline, and saw kindness as weakness. That's where Ethan learned to mask fear with a grin, the same grin that would one day haunt millions. The victim, Daniel Carter, was nothing like him. Daniel was the kind of student teachers used as an example, polite, reliable, a straight-A kid with a quiet strength that didn't need to shout. He'd been tutoring Ethan in math after school, a program meant to help at-risk youth. For a few weeks, it almost worked. Ethan showed up, listened, even smiled for real once or twice. But then came the argument. It started over something small, a phone, a rumor, a joke taken too far. No one remembers exactly how it escalated, only that one shove turned into two, and then there was a sound no one could forget. A single hit, a fall, a crack against the edge of a concrete step. Daniel didn't get back up. When the police arrived, Ethan didn't run. He didn't cry. He just stood there, staring at his own hands, muttering something no one could quite understand. Some said he whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen." Others swore he said nothing at all. But when cameras caught his face during the arrest, there it was, that faint smirk, half defiance, half disbelief. The image spread online like wildfire, a teen killer who smiled. Headlines screamed, "No remorse," "Monster in a hoodie," "Evil at 17." Protests erupted outside the juvenile courthouse. People demanded the harshest sentence possible. But others asked the opposite. How could society let a boy fall so far, so young? That's when Judge Judy was called in, not as a television icon, but as a retired judge requested for a special public hearing meant to restore faith in justice. The court believed her sharp intellect and emotional intelligence could handle a case that had torn the community in half. When she entered the courtroom that morning, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Reporters whispered. Even the bailiffs stood taller. Judy glanced around the room, not seeking cameras or fame, only truth. She read the file once, then twice, frowning slightly at the margins. She said, "Something's missing. A motive doesn't make a monster. A void does." Ethan was brought in wearing standard issue gray. No tears, no fear, just that same mask. The victim's parents sat behind the prosecution table, holding each other like they might collapse if they let go. Judy's eyes met Ethan's across the room. She didn't see a killer. She saw a question, one that society hadn't answered yet. Who failed him first? His parents, his teachers, the system, or himself? As the hearing began, Judy's tone was steady but heavy. She didn't shout, didn't scold. She simply watched. Every shrug, every smirk, every flicker of movement, she absorbed it like evidence of something deeper than guilt. Friends, by then, the world had already judged Ethan Miller. But inside that courtroom, Judge Judy wasn't looking for monsters. She was looking for the last trace of a boy, the part still capable of hearing the truth. What no one knew then was truth was about to arrive, handwritten, sealed in an envelope, and carried by the smallest voice in the room, a voice that would soon make even the coldest heart tremble. The air in the courtroom had changed. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was something colder, sharper, like invisible ice forming between every heartbeat. The hearing was underway. Cameras clicked in soft bursts, catching each angle of Ethan Miller's still, detached face. To most, he looked like a statue, unmoved, unrepentant, unbreakable. But Judge Judy saw what others didn't, the tiny twitch beneath his jaw, the almost imperceptible flicker in his eyes. She knew he wasn't as calm as he pretended. The prosecution began its case. A tall, methodical woman named Linda Reeves stepped forward, her voice trembling only slightly as she began to speak. "Your Honor, this is not a story of self-defense. This is not an accident. This was a moment of rage followed by indifference." As she recounted the details, the courtroom seemed to shrink. Words like impact, skull fracture, and no attempt to call for help sliced through the air like cold knives. Each sentence carried weight, each photo displayed on the monitor, the crime scene, the backpack, the blood-stained pavement tightened the air in everyone's lungs. Ethan stared forward, blank. Then as the prosecutor described the moment paramedics found Daniel's lifeless body, something happened. A small, mocking curve appeared on his lips, the same smirk that had haunted every headline. Gasps erupted. The victim's mother, sitting only a few feet away, broke. Her hand flew to her mouth as a sob tore through her chest. The sound was raw, the kind that silences everyone else instantly. Her husband tried to hold her, but his own tears were already falling. "You laughed," she cried out, her voice cracking. "You're laughing at my son." A bailiff stepped closer, but Judge Judy raised her hand. She said softly, "Let her speak." Her tone wasn't about control. It was about truth. Ethan's smile faded slightly, but his eyes didn't move toward the woman. Instead, he looked down at the table, exhaling through his nose like he was bored. That one gesture sent a shiver through the entire room. Even the defense attorney looked shaken. When the prosecution finished, there was a long pause. Then came the defense. A middle-aged public defender named Robert Hayes stood up. His face was pale, his voice steady, but heavy. "Your Honor, Ethan Miller is 17 years old."
"Mr. Miller, look at me." The boy's gaze lifted, sluggish and reluctant. For a few seconds, the courtroom disappeared. It was just the two of them, locked in an unspoken battle of wills. Judy's voice was calm but piercing. "You watched a boy die, didn't you?" He nodded, faintly. "And when his mother cries, you don't look at her. Why is that?" Ethan shrugged. "What's the point? It won't change anything." Her tone hardened. "You're right. It won't change the past. But it might change you." Her words hung in the air like smoke. The audience leaned in, waiting for something, a crack, a reaction, anything. But Ethan only blinked once, jaw tightening again. The smirk didn't return, but the defiance still lingered. Friends, can justice exist without remorse? Can punishment heal when the heart refuses to feel? These were the questions echoing in that courtroom, questions that no gavel could answer. The hearing was supposed to be routine, a verdict, a sentence, a few closing remarks. But as Judge Judy closed her file and glanced at the clerk, something unexpected happened. A folded piece of paper was handed to her, sealed in an envelope marked "Private, from the Carter family." She hesitated for a moment, then broke the seal. Inside was a letter, not from the mother, not from the father, but from Daniel's little sister, a girl barely 12 years old who had written her heart out in shaky handwriting. And before the day was over, that letter would change everything, not just the courtroom, but Ethan Miller himself. When Judge Judy unfolded the letter, even the air seemed to hesitate. The paper trembled slightly in her hands, not from her, but from the quiet current of anticipation that rippled through the room. No one spoke. The cameras zoomed in. The mother held her breath. Ethan leaned back in his chair, still wearing that faint, smug smirk, as if none of it mattered. Judy glanced toward the clerk. "Who wrote this?" The clerk's voice was low, almost reverent. "It's from Daniel Carter's little sister, Emily. She asked that it be read aloud in court." Something in the judge's eyes softened for the briefest moment. A child's voice in a room full of adults who had already chosen sides. She unfolded the page completely, her gaze dropping to the shaky handwriting. Then she began to read. "Dear Ethan," she started, and the sound of that name from her mouth made the boy glance up, not out of respect, but curiosity. The letter continued, "I know you don't know me very well. I was Daniel's sister. I'm 12. He used to help me with my homework and walk me home after school. When he didn't come home that day, I waited on the porch for hours. I thought maybe he stopped for ice cream or something. But then my mom came running, and I knew something terrible had happened." The courtroom was silent. You could hear a pen drop. Judy's voice was steady, but her throat tightened as she read on. "I saw your picture on the news, and I was angry. I wanted to hate you so bad, but then I saw you looked young too. You looked like someone who needed help and never got it. My mom says that doesn't excuse what you did, and she's right. But I think hating you won't bring my brother back either." The boy blinked slowly, the smirk faltering for half a second. The letter went on. "Daniel used to tell me that people aren't born mean. They just get hurt and don't know how to stop hurting others. He said when someone's mean to you, you can choose to break the chain. So I'm choosing to break it. I forgive you, even though I don't know why I should. I hope one day you figure out what made you so angry, and I hope when you do, you'll stop hurting yourself too." Judge Judy paused. A long, heavy silence filled the courtroom. The sound of someone sniffling broke it, one of the jurors wiping tears they couldn't hide. Even the prosecutor turned her face slightly, pretending to adjust her glasses. But the most shocking thing wasn't the letter. It was Ethan. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink. His lips curled again into that same quiet grin, smaller, colder, almost like mockery. Judy noticed it instantly. She folded the letter carefully, setting it down on the bench in front of her. Her eyes, sharper now, fixed on the boy. "Do you find something amusing, Mr. Miller?" He shrugged. "I just don't get it. How can she forgive me? I don't need that." "You don't need forgiveness?" she repeated softly. He shook his head. "Doesn't change what happened." "No," she replied, her voice like low thunder. "It changes you." The boy looked away, avoiding her gaze. The smirk was still there, but thinner now, almost defensive, as if it was the last wall between him and something too painful to face. Judy leaned forward. "That letter wasn't written for you to feel better. It was written to remind you that you're still human, even if you're trying very hard not to be." Ethan's jaw tightened. For the first time there was a flash, not of guilt, not of fear, but confusion, like someone who had lived so long in darkness that the first hint of light burned his eyes. The judge looked down again at the letter, tracing one line with her finger. "I forgive you, even though I don't know why I should." She repeated it aloud, slowly, intentionally. The words echoed through the chamber like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. Friends, there are moments in life when forgiveness feels impossible, when justice seems too weak to hold the weight of grief. Yet here was a child, barely 12, teaching everyone in that courtroom what grown adults had forgotten, that mercy isn't weakness, it's strength. But as powerful as that moment was, the boy's smirk returned just as the hearing adjourned for a short recess. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and one thing became clear. Ethan Miller still hadn't understood the gravity of what was happening. He thought the worst was over, but Judge Judy was only getting started. When the court reconvened after recess, the mood had shifted entirely. The air that had once been thick with anger now carried something different. Expectation, maybe, even fear. Ethan sat with his head tilted, staring blankly at the floor, the same cold composure etched across his face. The cameras were ready again, lenses glinting beneath the white courtroom lights. But this time, the focus wasn't on the boy. It was on the woman who was about to speak. Judge Judy re-entered, every step deliberate, her robe swaying slightly as she returned to the bench. She didn't look at the lawyers or the audience. Her eyes were fixed solely on Ethan. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't the sharp, cutting tone people knew from television. It was lower, steadier, layered with something far heavier. Disappointment. "Mr. Miller," she began, "when I first looked at you this morning, I didn't see a killer. I saw a child who lost his way. But over the last few hours, I've seen something far more dangerous. Arrogance disguised as strength." Ethan's gaze flicked up for a second, that familiar smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth, like muscle memory. Judy noticed it instantly. She lifted the letter from her bench and held it in her hand, the paper trembling slightly in the air-conditioned room. "This letter," she said softly, "was written by a 12-year-old girl who lost her brother, a child with more courage in her heart than most adults ever find. While you were smirking, she was forgiving you. While you were hiding behind arrogance, she was choosing empathy." Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening, the smirk faltering for a half-second, then returned like a reflex. Judy's tone hardened. "Your smirk, that's not fooling me. I've seen men twice your age, men who thought they could outsmart the truth. They laughed too. They all thought they were untouchable. but every one of them learned the same lesson. Time does not heal arrogance. It exposes it. She leaned forward. You took a life, Ethan. You didn't just end Daniel Carter's future. You shattered the lives orbiting his. You stole birthdays, graduations, and laughter from a family that did nothing to you. And you did it with such detachment that the world mistook you for a monster. Ethan's breathing grew uneven. His eyes darted toward the victim's mother for the first time. She was crying silently, clutching her husband's hand. Judy continued, her tone now softer, more deliberate. But I don't think you're a monster, Ethan. I think you're a boy who's forgotten what being human feels like. And that, Mr. Miller, is the tragedy here. The courtroom was frozen. Even the guards at the door had stopped moving. Your sentence, Judy said, will reflect both justice and mercy. For the crime of manslaughter, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in state custody. But that's not the part you should remember. The true sentence begins now. Ethan blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. You will spend those years not only serving time, but reflecting. Every morning when you wake up and every night before you sleep, you will read Emily Carter's letter out loud. You will read every word she wrote, whether you want to or not. You will remind yourself of the child you destroyed and the child who forgave you anyway. The courtroom gasped. Even the stenographer paused, his fingers frozen over the keys. Ethan's expression changed, not suddenly, but slowly, like a crack